Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, profiler here, and welcome. I want to apologize to you all today. I have a bit of a cold here, so if you'll put up with me, I'd appreciate it. And please stay with us through the course of the show. The name of the show is the Long Island Serial Killer Questions Answered. Long Island Serial Killer Questions Answered. So we're going to try and answer some questions. I definitely have an answer for a question that's been bothering me for a lot of years. Okay, about 12 years. All right. And of course, we always want to thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate you. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. We love your subscriptions. Please comment. We love your comments. We always get back to you. Today, I have our team on. I have Pam Bogart. Pam is a therapist that has worked in crisis counseling through probation for many, many years. She's a real pro, no question about it. She's a great researcher. I've never been a better researcher than her. And truly, I think, a great investigator. And, she has a big interest as we all do, in the Long Island serial killer and these poor victims. Also, I want to introduce Dustin Ranck. Dustin is a private investigator, licensed private investigator. He's also a specialist and tattoo artist. And he's going to be talking about Peach's tattoo today, too. So that's something of interest, okay? He's going to do a little bit on that. That's out of my league. So Dustin will be handling that. At this time, I want to give our deepest condolences to the families and victims of the Long Island serial killer. It's very sad to have all these victims, and it's very sad to have even more family members and friends. So the families and friends of the victims of Long Island serial killers, please accept our deepest condolences. Also, I have to put our disclaimer out there that Rex Heuermann is innocent till proven guilty in a court of law. And I also want to put a big shout out to Grizzly True Crime. Okay, Grizzly True Crime is excellent. They do major comprehensive coverage. Gisla is really a pro at what she does. I don't think I've met anybody better than her. I never met anybody that'll outwork her. I'll tell you that. So for a comprehensive report on everything that's going on, she'll be all over this case, I'm sure. Check into Grizzly True Crime, and I think you'll get a lot out of it if you haven't already. Most people have. We love the Grizzlies over here. They're a great bunch. So anyway, one of the questions I have was, why the dismemberment of the bodies? Okay, why were the bodies dismembered? In other words, was this serial killer a cutter, or was he not a cutter? Rarely serial killers are into cutting. But some are. That's an obsession with them. It's a fetish. It's part of their fantasy. But was he or was he not? Or was this part of his body disposal? You have to understand, supposedly, we have someone being killed in his house, and then we have them being dismembered. Then we have a torso or body taken to Manorville, at least the torso. We have it dumped in Manorville. But then we have some body parts taken from that torso and dumped in Gilgo. So you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? Why would somebody do that? Why would a serial killer do that? Why not just, take the person to Manorville in the woods, deep in the woods, bury them whole, spend a half hour digging a hole, and that's it. Nothing to talk about, out of sight, out of mind. No, no, not this guy. What's he getting out of this? You know, here's a torso. Haha, you can't identify who it is, can you, law enforcement? Definitely going to have shock value for first responders to find it, whatever person comes across that. And then we have these body parts dropped off in Gilgo that are found later. Shocking they got to be. There's no question about it. But haha, law enforcement, even though you found these body parts, guess what? You don't know who this is. You can't connect them. So he's looking at Manorville dumping body parts, torso, and whatever. Then we're looking at Gilgo, other body parts, and nobody's going to be able to guess who it is. See, this is the power and control that they like to exact over other people. I've got one on you. You're going to be scared when you find any of these body parts, but you're not even going to know who it is. You're not even going to have a clue. I mean, I just wonder if this guy has some kind of beef with law enforcement, like, because he's taunting here. You can see he's taunting, and then you say to yourself, "Is he taunting?" But when we put this together, this kind of behavior, along with the way he was taunting the family members with some of his victims' phones and being extremely cruel to them and trying to really torture them with what he was going to do to their sister, to their loved one. I mean, and he made a number of calls to torture people and taunt people on the phone. So this is part of this guy's ritual, this taunting. Okay, this is what he's about. This is a part of him. I'm not saying it's all of him, but it's a part of him. It's a behavior that he's very interested in having. He wants to torture and upset people and taunt them. You don't know who I am, and look at what I've given you. And I've given you bodies. So this is quite a serial killer we have here. This psychopathic sadist who just likes to taunt law enforcement and families. Why tie the bodies up? The guy's into bondage. Real quick to answer that one. This guy's been into bondage. I mean, a lot of the searches, films he's watched, he's a bondage guy. That's, definitely one of his fetishes. Very much into bondage. And I'll guarantee you that he has trophies on devices that they found. And that'll all come up, I'm sure, later in court. But I guarantee this guy has auditory and probably visual, has both. The reason I say auditory, because the phone was his thing. He loved to talk and really upset people and be extremely cruel to them to extract sorrow while having them on the phone. What do you guys think about that? What do you just think about this guy in general and what I've just put out there? And it doesn't have to be verbatim on what I put out. But what do you think about this guy's taunting and how cruel he is, his sadism? I mean, and now we know, there's no doubt that this guy could have bodies elsewhere that are dismembered, and they're his, even though a lot of the bodies on Gilgo were not dismembered, including the Gilgo 4. Okay, so that's why I'm happy to hear this, that they have a victim that they can tie him to that was dismembered, because up until now, I was kind of left, in a lurch. Is he into dismemberment? Is he not into dismemberment? Don't forget, we got another serial killer who's in jail, who was up around that Manorville area, who lived there as well. Okay, Johnny Burloff. I mean, so you got to understand, this is, been kind of unique, a very unique kind of situation here. and extremely challenging. I tip my hat to law enforcement. I've talked enough. Go ahead, guys.
Go ahead, Pam.
Okay.
I got some notes here, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna just make a comment on you know, what you were saying about the bodies, John, because initially when he was arrested, I read through the initial bail application. This is, going back to 2023. And a lot of his searches, were so varied. It wasn't like he just searched, one particular thing, which made me believe like all those victims, some were dismembered, some were, choked, some were tortured. These are things he all looked up. And especially one of the comments he made on there was Asian twink. And I remember thinking, wow, that's interesting, because nobody really associated him to the Asian male who they still haven't identified on Gilgo. But that just, if I could be mistaken, but I think that particular victim was maybe bludgeoned to death. I'm not sure. But yeah, I just thought back to the searches that he did that were in that, that report. I was going to say something else and I lost track. I was going to say, so you can take over, Dustin. If I think about it, I'll jump in.
Yeah, for real. Just and it's and what both you guys are saying. We got partial bodies and stuff like that. We know, John, and historically these guys, and it makes me wonder, because if this is Mr. Huerman, we know he's not an idiot. Like, he's got some technical acumen, and he's running a business. I mean, I'm not saying he's like a genius or anything, but if this guy is playing the long game, and it would make me wonder. I mean, you could see two reasons potentially for the body parts. One, he's a younger guy, he's chopping them up. It's a lot of work. I mean, I mean, I'm not chopping up bodies, but I've done a ton of hunting in my life. And it takes some effort to do that. Plus you've got, it's messy, and you got a lot of pieces. Anyway, not to get too graphic, but you could see if this guy's starting to kind of age out, and like you say all the time, John, and his the data kind of bears it out that these guys have got this addictive behavior, and they're not going to stop. They might slow down or take a break, but that fantasy is just driving all the time. You can see him just kind of starting to age out and getting not lazy, but chopping up a body is a ton of work, man, and it's a lot of mess. So you could see him on that angle switching gears. But the other thing that makes me wonder, if Rex is playing the long game here, or whoever this is, we don't know that it is for sure at this point. Although the evidence is pretty interesting, you got to admit. You could see him playing the long game, like you say, taunting. The taunting thing really struck me as you were talking. I was writing some notes. Is this guy playing the long game? Is he spreading this stuff out so that he's got an ace card somewhere down the line if he gets caught, where he can start dropping clues, getting out, taking people on joyrides, finding body sites, identification, stuff like that. I mean, you start chopping up a body and moving the pieces around and they're unidentified. These guys aren't going to forget at all who their victims are. We look at, Sam Little. I mean, that guy got locked up in jail, and he starts painting portraits of his victims. So we know that they do not forget. But I could see somebody that has a reasonable amount of intelligence using that against law enforcement, not only to taunt them during the investigation, but if he gets caught, he's got something they don't know. So I could see that big time.
Yeah, and when we look at Little, I mean, you talk about an eye for detail. I mean, and this guy, claims to have killed 90 some, women. If in fact can all be proved, he would have the highest body count among sexual serial killers in the United States. There's no
Yeah.
question about it. You know, he would have outdone our boy Gary Ridgway, you know.
That's right.
Pam, what do you think? I mean, even Valerie Mack, like,
Y-
would we even would we even think that Valerie Mack would be connected to Gilgo like 6 months ago? You
You
know
know,
what I mean? Or Jessica Taylor? I mean, it's just wild.
I wanted to go back because I did remember what I was going to say when you had mentioned he might have something against law enforcement, like maybe he's got something against law enforcement. Well, his family, like in searching his family, I mean, he had family members that were law enforcement, you know? So who knows if he's got anything, and he's also has friends that were in law enforcement, you know? Um, so
Absolutely. And we know that this guy was taunted himself as a young man. I mean, if you go
Mhm.
back and you read through his
Yeah.
history, you know, and
Good
you know,
point. Good point, Dustin.
we see this all the time, you know, we're hurt, and we
Right,
talk about this tons, you know, hurt people hurt people. So
right.
he's playing his cards.
Mhm.
The taunted becomes the taunter, right?
Right.
Right. Good
Absolutely.
point. Good point, Pam.
Absolutely.
And something else too. I mean, we don't even know if this guy maybe years ago wanted to be a cop.
Right,
Because you run into this too. Couldn't pass the psych test.
right,
Hmm.
I have no grounds,
right.
to cement that in or to call that shot, but it has happened where a lot of these guys, because of that whole power and control egomania they're running around with, they want to have a position of power, and they look at law enforcement as being people, with positions of power who have a lot of control. So some of them go off to try and get into law enforcement, and then they get tested by a psychologist, and they're told, sorry, you failed the test. You can't give you a gun and put you on the street. So,
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, there could be some more stuff here with law enforcement. We're gonna have to wait. We're gonna have to wait and see, but guaranteed the way law enforcement's running with this, and it's happening so fast. I think we'll know a lot more sooner than later. I don't think we'll have to wait that long.
I was
I
gonna
mean,
say,
go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
you had asked me about Valerie Mack, and I was gonna say that weren't the circumstances, well, we don't know exactly, but I mean, they were found within what, feet of each other or
Not
yards of
too
each
far
other,
from each
or
other.
same road, right? Halsey, was it Halsey Road or something like that off of the, but anyway, they were killed in the same kind of manner, right? And I think they were bound. If
Well,
I'm
I'm not sure. I don't know about that, but I know they were both together, and I know they were dismembered.
right, right. I think I had heard some, like I said, this is just like from what I've been hearing on different sites, is that, they were like, because he was a hunter, they were sort of bound like an animal would be. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he definitely from hunting would know how to do that. But don't forget the guy's into bondage too.
yes,
He
yes,
likes
exactly,
bondage.
exactly.
There's no question about it. The other part of it too is that you have to understand, here's a guy who probably dismembered, these women in his house. I don't see him doing it in a hotel, but anything's possible. But I would say his house is my guesstimate. Next thing you know, he has them up in Manorville, 40, 50 miles away. Now you got to understand, that serial killers are the most vulnerable and the most fearful when they have a body on their hands after they've gone through that euphoric high and that sexually exciting ritual that they're involved in. So, and they've killed the victim. Well, now they've got a body on their hands, and they just want to usually, in most cases, put mileage between them and that body. Because the more mileage they put between them and the body, the more people they put between them and that body, and anybody and everybody is possibly the killer, right? So anyway, he carts them up to Manorville. And, whether he went to Gilgo first or Manorville first, I got a feeling he went to Manorville first, dumps a torso, takes other body parts, brings it back to Gilgo. Now, we know for a fact that serial killers put a lot of miles on their car. They drive a lot. There is no question about that. Okay, we've done a lot of research on that. So now you got this guy just driving around with these bodies and body parts, and, thinking he's pulling one over, and eventually, he gets caught up with, like we said earlier, what's our slogan? DNA goes a long way, right?
Yeah.
So he got grabbed, because of the DNA. He never gave even enough thought or whatever. He wasn't clean enough. So, now, 20, 30 years is coming back to bite him in the ass, right? And it should. But the bottom line is, after a while, maybe as Dustin said, you mentioned it, he gets older, he's going up, but they get cocky. They get cocky. They get overconfident. That narcissism starts to build. Okay? So now instead of, I don't have to drive up to Manorville, I don't have to cut the person up and get rid of them. I mean, look, they couldn't even find the bodies I've left right here in our backyard over in Gilgo, for all these years and everything. So, I'm just going to deposit the Gilgo 4 over in Gilgo, and I'm not going to bother cutting them up or anything like that. See, that's what threw this off. The Gilgo 4 not being cut up, bonded, but not being cut up. So, you start looking at that and you start saying to yourself, well, they were bound, but they weren't cut up. So is this guy a cutter? And I know a lot of people, are thinking of this because and don't want to immediately don't want to get nailed down for it because a cutter and then not a cutter, unless it's part of your ritual for body disposal. And that's when he was cutting, and then he got too cocky. He felt he didn't have to cut up anymore. He didn't want to taunt anymore. He just went, and maybe it was with age, and he just wanted to, dispose of them. And cutting wasn't necessary. Taking a long drive to Manorville wasn't necessary. These people can't outsmart me. Right in my backyard. That's where I'll put the bodies. And he got away with that for a long time before those bodies were identified. There were years, right, that went by before they were identified even. So, but then they got identified and then law enforcement followed up and, so what do you see? Like when you look at this case, guys, what jumps out at you the most?
Go ahead, Pam.
I was gonna say that I, which is not a surprise to anybody, that I think he's got victims. This is just the beginning to a long,
100%. Yeah.
long story. And I think there's gonna be a lot of twists and turns, and like I said before, he's connected to a lot of different states, whether he owns property or has relatives. I mean, and he traveled, so I don't know. This is just the beginning. That's what jumps out at me. It's just gonna be more surprises and more shocks, I think.
100%. And to your point there, Pam, yeah, what we're looking at Gilgo there is, and we got to remember, Rex, if this is the guy, what do you say? He's like 60 or something,
60,
yeah, even if we go back 20 years to Gilgo, I mean, it's a tiny snapshot.
right.
And we know this guy didn't just probably start diving into this stuff at 40 or 50 years old.
No way. No way.
No way. Yeah. No way.
We can put him at 31. I'm sorry, at 29 years old with Jessica Taylor around 29.
But John,
These guys usually start 25 or less.
I think that was Sandra Casillo, right? The first one that he he was like, that was 93.
I
Yeah.
stand to be corrected. 93, correct. Let me make sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You're right, Pam.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, no, please correct me. Hey, I make mistakes. Don't, nobody's perfect here. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Jessica was found in 2003. He would have been 39 years old then.
Still young.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In a prime. He's in his prime.
Yeah, and I think as you're talking here, all of us here are talking, it's going to be interesting to see, because we know they haven't stopped the investigation either. And like Pam said, this guy, he's got property, he's got relatives, he travels. It's going to be interesting if they do find additional bodies that they can tie to him through DNA. That's going to answer some more questions too. In the sense, are they going to be, complete? Do they have trauma? Are they cut up? That might establish a little bit more of a timeline about his behavior. If we start finding bodies going way back in other states or even on Long Island that, let's say, they are chopped up, then it's going to give us a little bit of an idea of what he's thinking. Like you said, that narcissistic, like, hey man, these guys can never touch me. And he just finally, stops putting in that much effort. But I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens
Yeah,
as
he's
these
not.
investigators.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just it'll be interesting to see, as these investigators continue to dig, because it seems like they have, obviously they just did another, search of his house. So, you got to know that they're still looking, and they're still looking hard. They're still finding stuff, because if they're doing a second search, they are digging up more evidence. So.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it's just really interesting that now they can widen their net
Mhm.
because he is not above dismembering and cutting up people.
Right.
Whereas with the first four victims, we couldn't say that.
Mhm.
So, was it him? Was it not him? Could he do this? Could he not do this? What's he made out of? So now they can really widen the net and see what they can produce on this.
Mhm.
Something else is, the focus and the information you brought up a little earlier on peaches, because we're looking at peaches too. Just your 2 cents on peaches, Dustin.
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing, John. And this, as we were talking before the show, that tattoo, when I'm looking at that, or that specific image, and you guys had brought up something to my attention that I had never seen before, and that was the issue with initials. But let's go into the rewind machine for a second. As I'm looking at tattoos, first of all, the tattoos, it's degraded a bit, but it's for, being in a place that is, where she was found, it's got a fair amount of clarity to it. So the first thing I'm looking at is tool marks. I want to know, if I'm looking at a tattoo, there's three primary places I'm going to look. Is it done in jail? Is it done in somebody's, maybe some scratcher on the street, or is that done at a shop? And you can look at Peach's tattoo, and you can see, you don't, especially if we go back 20 years, one of the things that is, because I didn't know that there had been contact made with the artist that had done that for Peaches. Now, if we did not have that, we, investigators potentially could take a sample of that pigment, because if we go back 20 years or even a little bit further, there's only a handful of companies. Now, not so much. Now you've got stuff coming from all over the world, but there was a time that there was only a small handful of pigment manufacturers in the world. And you could take a sample of that, you could find the composition of the pigment, and you could determine what manufacturer it came from, and then you could start nailing it down to distributors, then you could start nailing it down to customers, which there was a time that wouldn't be a big deal. Now it's probably next to impossible. But you look at that, and you're not going to see a tattoo like that most of the time. And like you say, you're working the percentages here, that's going to come out of a shop. But that particular image it's not uncommon a peach with a bite taken out of it. But, over my 35 years of tattooing, typically that's like a little bit of that tattoo has a little bit, and I'm not going to get graphic here at all, but it has a little bit of a sexual connotation to it. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's kind of a sexier tattoo. So if I'm looking at those initials, and immediately there's almost no way that a woman is going to put, a kid's initials into that type of tattoo. Now, it's also important for people that aren't in the tattoo trade. Tattoo symbolism is whatever the wearer ultimately ascribes to it, right? Even though there might be a pretty broad, bracket that image fits into historically. So when you're looking at that, that'd be more something that you might see on, you might, well, personally, that was a tattoo, not that specific one, but that peach with the bite out of it was something I did a lot on dancers. It was a lot on sex workers, stuff like that. So, and that's not a judgment toward peaches whatsoever. I'm just saying that that's a demographic of people that I would typically do that tattoo on. So if it's not a kid, because it has that little bit of connotation to it, it's almost certainly going to be a significant other, boyfriend, ex-husband, pimp, potentially. So what we don't know is who those initials belong to right now. But it was pretty interesting that I'd seen that tattoo so many times and never noticed the initials in there, because it gives some significance. Now, how much the tattoo artist knows about that story, well, I mean, for me, and I don't know how this is with every single tattoo artist, because they're all different and the environment's different, and the kind of energy that they put out to customers can be really different. For me, people were pretty open. So if we were working an image, regardless of what it is, man, I could look at almost even of the thousands of tattoos that I've done, tens of thousands of tattoos. Yeah, some of them are forgettable, especially if you're working a street shop and you're doing 15 tattoos a day, just jamming them out, that gets pretty ambiguous. But if you're working with clients, those stories become pretty important as you are working the imagery and, working with initials. Typically people are pretty open about that. Does that tattoo artist know? I'm not saying they do or don't. I don't know. I'm just saying, for me, that would be something I would remember because of the way that my shop dynamic was and just how my interaction with my customers was. Plus, I was interested. That was the thing that I loved about tattooing so much. Yeah, I love the artwork and I love the technical aspect of it. It was fantastic. That's really like the human stories that you get to hear every day, that really appealed to me. There's no, I find it interesting that for a lot of tattooers, it doesn't really change maybe their perception of the world or other human beings. For me, it did, because I had interactions with such a diverse crowd. I felt really lucky that I had access from anything from, sex workers to Fortune 500 company owners. So those stories were really important. And obviously those initials, whatever they were and whoever they represent, that was something that was important to Peaches. So can we find that out? Maybe, we're all kind of digging around here trying to see if we can find what those, and is there something in Peach's past that is on paper that might be tied to? That will be a little hard to find out unless she was, let's say she was married and had a marriage license. Like, that would be something you could find. But if it was just a guy that she was dating, or maybe somebody that she was working for, that's pretty nebulous, and you're probably not going to find it unless that person or somebody that was in her circle. I mean, Peaches didn't live in a vacuum. There's people that knew her, and obviously she, had a kid too. So somewhere out there, somebody recognizes that tattoo. And I think, and if I'm wrong, I'll admit it, but if Peaches was involved in sex work, there's going to be a lot of reasons, as we all know, that people aren't going to come forward because they might be engaged in that activity, or they maybe feel ashamed of having been engaged in that activity. So it makes it really hard sometimes to dig up that information, and as a private investigator, one of my advantages if I'm interviewing people is I'm not law enforcement. Unless somebody's diming me over some really, like a sex trafficking thing or something. I don't give a shit if people do drugs or what they do in their personal life. So I'm not going to dime them, and people typically are a little bit more open with me than, say, maybe a street cop or whatever, and maybe they're a little more willing to talk. So who knows? I don't know what's in Peach's circle, but multiple people have seen that tattoo for sure. Friends, family, potentially somebody's seen it. And I hope, and I would encourage them to, there's a lot of anonymous ways to relay that information that's not going to get you in trouble if that's something that you're concerned about, and you don't have to worry about it. So,
Dustin, a question for you.
yes, yeah.
Usually when a customer comes in, like a Peaches, and
Mhm.
they want a tattoo like that, and they describe it to you on how they want you to do it,
Mhm.
would they probably, because you've mentioned that, customers definitely will, you know, um, talk with you
Oh yeah.
if you're doing the tattoo, and they may, it's like in a way you're a counselor or something. They may reveal stuff to you about them that they, like to keep personal, and you don't want to talk to people about. Do you see her talking to that tattoo artist and explaining why she wants that type of tattoo, that piece?
She yeah, she may very well do that. Now, if that was just a design that was on the wall, she may have just walked in, picked a number, got it, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. So that is one angle. Now, at my shop, we didn't have that kind of stuff. We were a little more personalized. So yeah, we would be having those types of conversations. Excuse me. She may not tell me exactly what that tattoo means specifically to her, but she's going to give me a lot of information about herself that lets me put the pieces together. You better believe it. Absolutely. People many times will, I kind of use the river around the rock, right? Like your rock is the specific piece of information. The river kind of holds it there in place. It streams around it, right? So you're going to get a lot of peripheral information about that person's life that you go, okay, I got it. you know, they're, especially if they're engaged. A lot of the dancers and sex workers I worked on over the years, I had great working relationships with them in the shop. They were actually really great customers, and lots of them were longtime clients. Um, and yeah, over the years, as they develop a relationship with you, a professional relationship in the shop, yeah, sometimes they come right out with it and just tell you, and sometimes it gets cultivated. You can, if you're like a people person, and you know how it is, John and Pam too. When you're working with people face to face, you read in their body language. You know how to, and you've met and you've heard all these stories, and you kind of have a catalog in your mind about people's behavior. You can kind of figure it out pretty quick most of the time. But the more contact you have with them, the more details you're going to get. Now, a tattoo like that's a one-shot deal. Probably took 15 or 20 minutes. If she walked into a shop, picked it out, she was probably in there. If she wasn't waiting in line, that might have been a total of an hour interaction and maybe 15, 20 minutes with the artist. So we don't know what that artist might know, but absolutely, John. They will tell you everything. And but as a tattoo artist, you have to have the responsibility to and there was a time not that long ago that you had to kind of be the keeper of secrets, because people did tell you a lot of stuff, and you knew they may not say, oh, hey, like I smoked this guy on the corner last night, but this guy puts in work, or he's a shot caller for a gang or a club. You better believe you're not going to say anything, because you'll get clipped doing that. So you can't be a loudmouth running on the street. You hold that tight and you just leave it there. And now again, if somebody said, hey, like you found out somebody was abusing a child or something like that, absolutely, all bets are off. But when it comes to just, you can't go to law enforcement and say, hey man, I think this dude's like in a gang, and I think he's up to something pretty bad. You cannot do that. So historically, tattoo shops are a pretty safe conversational space for people that, because, and there's a lot of people, John, and I'm sure you know this too, Pam, the sex workers and the dancers that I worked on, almost universally, and I can't give you an exact percentage, but most of those women were moms. They weren't doing that work because they liked it. That's for damn sure. They had a lot of trauma in their life. Most time they were just trying to make ends meet. And that was the one thing, that was the one asset that they had, that they could actually generate revenue to feed their kids or pay for their apartment. So, of course, there's never going to be any judgment from me around that at all. And I know from you guys too. So when people are carrying that kind of weight around, because it's a lot, it's something that's often looked down upon. Like if you were to put that on a job application, like you're screwed, So it does help for people to have a place. They're kind of getting a twofer. They're getting a cool tattoo, but they get to speak with you openly about the things that are on their mind or the challenges that they're encountering. I mean, there's so much information that people carry around with them. And as a tattoo artist, you are really privy to an awful lot of that. So I gotta believe, maybe not the tattoo artist, but certainly Peach's Circle. Yeah, if they didn't know exactly what she was up to, you better believe if you putting the pieces together now and you're looking at it with 2020 hindsight, you're probably, if you could track those people down or get some contact with them, you would find out a lot of information for sure.
If you were a detective on this case, how would you track down the tattoo artist that did Pete?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would blast it. I would get some, if I had access to good technology, right? I might even reach out for help to do that. And there's lots of ways that are not in law enforcement. Then you could get an image, whatever it is, you can get it enhanced, you can get it clarified. So the first thing I would do, I would want the stock crime scene photo, and I would want some higher res images, and I would blast. Well, there's a couple ways I would approach it. If I was a law enforcement guy, I would put that out on social media. I'd put it out on Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And obviously you'd have a tip line. If I could, that would be the first, because that's the only way you're going to get that kind of reach. And you got to remember, now tattooing historically in New York is, it has, I mean, there are tattoo shops now, but it was illegal for a long, long time, even though there were shops operating in, Manhattan and Long Island. But it's dependent on the area and how much time you had. I would want to take those images myself to the tattoo shops so that I could read the people as I was showing those images too, because sometimes, as I'm sure you guys know, I'm not always looking for the information, although I'm looking for somebody's reaction to the information, which tells me how much further to press. It's good, reading the room, taking the temperature. It's going to, as an investigator, you can't always just, you just can't knock everything else on the head that you come across. Sometimes you got to be a little crafty, and you got to be tactful too. You got to remember, the tattoo business has been underground for a long, long, long time. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I won't say about it, but historically there's there's kind of an undercurrent of business sometimes that can historically, not so much now. The tattoo business changed a lot for sure, but I would spend the time on that Eastern Seaboard with as much time as even if I had to cultivate a CI, hire private investigators, you name it. And I'd want to be there. I'd want to be reading the person that I'm showing those images to, because like the sex worker analogy that were my clients, sex workers that were my clients, there's not, you might not always get, tattooers historically are not typically people that are talking to law enforcement. They don't want to talk to law enforcement for a variety of reasons. Now, I'm not casting shade on anybody Tattooers are hard workers, and it's a pretty tough business making a living in it, even when you're making a grip of dough. So I would want to be in front of that person so that I could gauge the reaction. That's what I would do. And once
Yeah,
I
well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it just once I lock in on somebody, then I'm going to pursue it. And then the very last thing I would do, anything that I ever do as an investigator, leverage is usually my last resort. One, I'm not a cop, so I have limited leverage, but I have access to law enforcement, so that's another thing. But oftentimes there are ways to access people's information without diming them or say getting them in trouble, or there's ways to approach it like, hey man, this is just the right thing to do. We got this case here and this is important. We really need your help. We need some intel. We don't need your name. I just need the information. You give me the information, I'm walking out of here and sayonara, see you later, never gonna see you again. So
Patches is toddler, Pam, Patches toddler, or I'm sorry, Peach's toddler. Sorry, folks. Peach's toddler is found, Gilgo, right? So I don't know the age, what the age would be or whatever, but if she would take her toddler with her, say, and if she was a sex worker, to go on a trick, which a lot of them that have kids do, because
Yeah.
what else
Yep.
are they going to do with the child, Who are they going to leave the child with? So, do you think it would be worthwhile? And it would just be a shot in the dark because, bottom line is she may have had this tattoo for, 10 years or 5 years before she had the baby. But I think it's worth a shot saying that, this woman may have had a baby with her when she came for the tattoo. Because if she would take the baby with her, to go out on a date, why wouldn't she take the baby with her if the baby was around then, to go for the tattoo? Did you have many women at all show up at your place with children and have the child wait while they got the tattoo?
I didn't. It was a rule. We didn't allow it for
Right.
health reasons. And
That answers a lot. That answers a
Yeah.
lot. Okay.
it can be a safety thing, especially if it's a toddler. I mean, there's really no way to, in a tattoo shop, there's no way to safely. Now, granted, most tattoo shops, and especially mine, I mean, we wrote the book on universal precautions around the tattoo business from my shop in my state. I mean, we set the bar extremely high, and it was one of my functions as an owner was to train the health inspectors and give seminars to the health inspectors as to what to look for. So, when we're talking about toddlers, especially, but even children, I mean, we, unless I knew you really well and I knew your kid was really, you got to remember, like tattooing is not, you know, it's a process and you have to be focused. And if you've got a kid jumping up and down on the chairs and going bananas, which, that's what a lot of kids do. It's not, not, slanting them at all. It's a huge distraction. But when you are working with bloodborne pathogens, despite, we clean every single surface, every single tool, every single thing. I mean, we had a fairly small shop and it took about 3 man hours a day to fully disinfect it and clean it and sanitize it. So we don't want to put, no matter how remote, a toddler or young kid's immune system is going to be very different. They're very handsy. They put their hands on everything. They stick them in their ears. They stick them in their mouth. It's just a bad policy to have kids. Now, I have worked in street shops where that was the case, and you didn't really have a choice. And there were little areas for the kids to hang out for 15 or 20 or minutes or half an hour. And it wasn't my shop, but that was just, everybody's got their own policy. Most shops don't allow it. Could it happen? Absolutely, because I've certainly worked in plenty that did allow it, because that was, when you've got a client base or a demographic of people in your area that you know, whether they're single moms or single dads or parents, whatever, you got parent works. It doesn't matter. If you got a lot of kids in the area and you get places like to get tattooed, you're going to have to potentially like rethink it and, you know, maybe make some adjustments to your shop environment to accommodate that, because that's your client base. So it just wasn't our policy for safety reasons.
Pam, what are you looking forward to? What's the next shoe to drop? What questions do you
Well,
have? You got a lot of documents. I can't believe all the documents that you've started to accumulate and all your research. I mean, it's just amazing how much stuff you come up with. Just
I
really incredible. I mean, what are you looking forward to? What's the next highlight you're looking forward to in this case? We've got more dead bodies out there.
well, I think we're going to find out about, I don't know when, but Valerie Mack and Karen Vergata. I think
Mhm.
that might be the next two that, you know, if they, you know, I mean, I got the impression from listening to the press conference today that if they're still working, they're still discovering things, right? They got
Absolutely.
so much to go through in that house and so many devices to go through. I mean, they're not through going through all those devices. You know, how could they be?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, and they've got to go through it
So,
real slow, piece at a
yeah,
time.
sure.
And you know, that takes a certain amount of manpower. You know, and they only have a certain amount of manpower they can use at a time. You know what I mean? It's a big job, right?
Right.
Yeah. And to Pam's point, I mean, you know, I mean, our devices have been around now so long that they're, you know, and especially if you're covering multiple devices, computers, phones, what have you. I mean, you might have several terabytes
Mm.
of information to go. And that's a huge amount, huge amount. So yeah, you're spot on. I mean, that's going to be really interesting because you're right. Like they're still looking. So you got to believe there's more.
This is gonna be, I just think this is gonna be never ending. I really do. I just do.
You believe you're going to see trophies,
Yes,
like pho
absolutely.
photographs come up on these devices? Maybe he recorded you know, people screaming or
Yes,
pleading with him. Because,
especially if he was auditory, right?
right, especially if he was auditory, and we named him, you know, years ago, the sweet talking killer, you know, and man, oh man, look at all these devices he had. So he would like to hear people plead for their lives. He'd like to hear people scream. He'd like to really hear people beg him. You know, I mean, that's it. That's their thing. I mean, you know, we've ran into a couple that aren't visual. Their primary intake sense isn't visual, and that's like a, you know, an oxymoron here in a way because the guy's an architect, right? So you'd say to yourself, my God, he's got to be visual. He's got to be primary intake sense has got to be visual. How many architects do you know that really don't have great eyes and aren't visual and
Mhm.
aren't really focused, right? Because they couldn't do what they do. But then look at the house he lived in, right? I mean, he didn't care what it looked like.
Yeah,
So,
but
you know, you take all this into consideration and everything. I mean, this is a real outlier. He's a real outlier, real strange dude, to put it mildly.
I think
Mildly.
he put his money into, you know, everything else, you know, like he had an expensive lifestyle, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Mm-hmm.
He put it into women, his obsession.
mhm,
Okay. He put it into women, his addiction. And he put it into what else? Things of control, things of
mhm.
power, guns.
Guns, yeah.
That's
And you
why I had
know,
so many guns because he can't have enough power. He can't have enough control. That's where the guns fit into the his personality and his behavior.
I think I might have mentioned this before, but I just see him overall as like, you know, like you talk about the playing games, not just with the police, but with the victims' families, right? On the phones and all that. I mean, he's like a real mind FUCK, right? I mean, that seems to be like his specialty. He like prides himself in that. And I mean, I don't know like if I'm getting the story entirely correctly, but something, and it was on TV because the woman was interviewed. She was a coworker of his. And she went on a cruise. I don't know if anybody saw this. Anybody see this? She worked with him. Did you see this, Dustin? She
No,
worked,
I heard of it, but I didn't see it,
yeah.
yeah.
She worked in his office. She came forward and told the story of like when she went on this cruise, you know, she basically told him, well, he was kind of, maybe he was like asking her where she was going. Well, you're not going to be able to find me wherever I'm at, or whatever. So here she is on the cruise, and here comes along a letter or something claiming, oh, I found you. Like this is the kind of, person he is. He's just like a real, mind F.
Yeah. Let me shock you. I
Yep.
want to shock you. I'm getting
Yep.
shock value out of this, but also at the same time, I want you to know I'm watching you and I know where you are and I'm in control.
Right.
That's what these guys are all about. That's what they're all about. Is there anything else you guys want to say before we break?
No, I don't. I think we've covered a lot of interesting information here. So, and some of this is like, with the tattoo stuff and some of the stuff Pam's been talking about. I've been busy working on other stuff, so some of this new intel to me, but I appreciate you guys like throwing that out there for sure.
Pam, you got anything?
I just want to, like I usually do, want to give my condolences to the families and friends of the new victims, because I watched the press conference today and I think that Jessica Taylor's mom was on there. It was really heartbreaking. Just really, really heartbreaking. So my deepest sympathy to all of them.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, let's close with that. Our deepest sympathies to the victims' families and friends. As we started the show with condolences, we'll end it with condolences. Want to thank our audience very much. Really appreciate you. Can't thank you enough. Hopefully we gain some more insight into this mind of a monster, getting into the monster's mind. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to try and look at every single thing we can that he has done or is doing, or because nothing can be left out with this guy. This guy can't put anything past him. He's not above anything. He believes he's not above anything, and he believes he's not beneath anything. I mean, this guy just goes and does what he wants to do. So until next time, thank you so much. Be safe, be careful out there. Thank you so much, Pam. Thank you so much, Dustin. God bless you all, and take care and be safe out there. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
guys.
Thank you,
Thank
Dustin.
you. Thanks, Pam and John. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.